My granddaughter cried about her student loans. Then I found her father's secret bank account. Claire's hands were shaking so badly the tea spilled over the rim of the cup and onto my carpet. She didn't notice. She was staring at the paper on my coffee table like it was a letter from a doctor carrying the worst kind of news. It wasn't a medical bill. It was a tuition statement. 3 pages, folded once. The total circled in red pen by someone at the bursar's office who probably didn't think twice about what that number meant to the girl who had to carry it home. "I don't know how I'm supposed to do this, Grandpa," she whispered. Her voice broke on the word "this." Not dramatically, quietly. The way a branch breaks under snow. Not all at once, just slowly, until the weight wins. She sat on my couch with her knees pressed together and her shoulders curled forward like she was trying to make herself smaller. She was 22. She should have been worrying about finals and friendships and what to eat for dinner. Instead, she was sitting in her grandfather's living room doing math that didn't have an answer. The teacup trembled in her grip. I reached over and steadied it with my hand. The house was quiet. The kind of quiet that shows up uninvited and stays too long. My wall clock ticked from the hallway, each second landing like a small stone dropped into still water. Outside, a neighbor's sprinkler hissed against the sidewalk in a rhythm that should have been soothing, but wasn't. Claire set the cup down on the saucer. Her fingers were red from gripping it. She pressed them flat against her thighs and took a breath that shook on the way in and shook worse on the way out. "I've applied for everything," she said. "Federal loans, private loans, 2 grants I found online at midnight. I picked up extra shifts at the restaurant. I'm working 30 hours a week on top of a full course load." She didn't cry loudly. She didn't sob or wail or make the kind of noise that demands attention. She folded inward. Her chin dropped, her eyes closed, her lips pressed together like she was holding something behind her teeth that she refused to let escape. I had seen that expression before. On her grandmother, on her mother, on every woman in this family who learned too young that asking for help felt like failing. "My dad says he can't help," she added, almost as an afterthought. Almost like she had already accepted it and was simply reporting the weather. Can't. The word sat between us on the coffee table next to the tuition bill like a third person in the room. It took up space. It had weight. And it didn't sit right with me. Not the way she said it. Not the way it landed. Can't is a word for people who have looked at every number, opened every drawer, turned every pocket inside out, and found nothing. Can't is what you say when the math genuinely doesn't work. When there is no money. When the account is empty and the options are gone, and you're standing at the bottom of a well, looking up at a circle of sky that keeps getting smaller. I knew what can't looked like. I had lived inside that word for years when I was younger. I ate canned soup for dinner 6 nights a week so my children could eat real meals at school. I drove a truck with a cracked windshield for 3 years because the replacement cost would have meant missing rent. Can't has a texture. And Damon's life didn't have it. My name is Walter Brennick. I am 76 years old. I have owned a hardware store, buried a wife, raised a son, and balanced more ledgers than I can count. My hands are spotted and slow now, but my mind still moves the way it always has, in straight lines, toward the truth. I know the difference between a man who can't help and a man who won't. Can't is empty pockets. Won't is a closed fist. Claire wiped her eyes with the back of her wrist and straightened up like she was embarrassed to have shown me the cracks. She picked up the tuition bill, folded it neatly along the original crease, and slipped it back into her bag. "I'll figure it out," she said. The way young people say it when they're terrified, but too proud to admit the ground is moving under them. I walked her to the door. She hugged me, tight. The kind of hug that holds on a second longer than it should, because letting go means going back to the problem. I stood on the porch and watched her drive away in a car with a dent in the rear quarter panel and a taillight held on with tape. Then I went inside and sat with the quiet. Damon came by 2 days later. He didn't call first. He never did. He just showed up the way people do when they consider your house an extension of their schedule. He parked his SUV in my driveway. Black. New. The kind with leather seats and a touchscreen the size of a dinner plate. The tires were clean, not gas station clean, dealership clean. The kind of clean that costs extra because someone else does the work. He walked in wearing a polo shirt with a brand on the chest I didn't recognize and a leather belt that caught the hallway light. His shoes were brown and polished, not working shoes, display shoes, the kind that have never been near mud. I poured him coffee. He took it without thanking me. That small thing. I noticed it every time. The absence of a word that costs nothing to give. I mentioned Claire, her loans, the tea that spilled on my carpet because her hands were shaking too hard to hold the cup. He shook his head, took a slow sip, set the mug down on my counter without a coaster. College builds character, he said, like debt was a curriculum. He leaned against my kitchen counter and crossed his arms. The posture of a man delivering wisdom from a position he believes he earned. I went through it too, he said. Nobody handed me anything. That wasn't true. I handed him plenty. I paid for his first 2 years of college before the hardware store hit a rough patch and I had to stop. I co-signed his first apartment lease. I loaned him $6,000 for a car he never fully paid back. I never mentioned the balance. I just let it dissolve into the silence between us, like sugar in water. But memory is selective when it serves a man's argument. He talked about financial responsibility, about the value of struggle, about how Claire would thank him someday for making her stand on her own. He said all of this while wearing a watch I had never seen before. Silver face, leather band. The kind that sits in a glass case at a department store and waits for someone with a certain kind of confidence to point at it. That watch cost more than Claire's textbooks for the entire semester. I didn't say that. I just poured him more coffee and let the math speak for itself inside my own head. I'm stretched thin, he said, with the casual delivery of a man reciting a line he had used before and planned to use again. He said it the way you say, traffic was bad. Not as an apology, as an explanation that expects no follow-up questions. Stretched thin, I nodded. Not because I agreed, because I was cataloging. 3 weeks earlier, Damon had posted photos from a golf trip to Ponte Vedra. I don't use social media much, but Claire showed me on her phone during one of her visits. 4 days. Resort greens, a steakhouse dinner with friends, matching polo shirts embroidered with something I couldn't read. 2 months before that, his wife Janine had renovated their kitchen. Claire mentioned it. New countertops, a double oven, a backsplash made of something imported that Janine found on a design show. Stretched thin doesn't play golf in Florida. Stretched thin doesn't install imported tile. Stretched thin eats soup 6 nights a week and drives a truck with a cracked windshield because the alternative is missing rent. I knew what stretched thin looked like. I had worn it for years. Damon was wearing a costume that looked like sacrifice but fit like comfort. I said nothing, but I was listening harder than he realized. Claire never asked him again. I learned this not because she told me directly, but because of what she stopped saying. She used to mention him in passing. Dad thinks I should try this. Dad said maybe next semester. Small sentences that carried the last thread of hope that he might step in. Those sentences disappeared. She came over on Sundays now. Not every Sunday, but most. She brought her textbooks and spread them across my dining table while I read the newspaper in my chair. She studied quietly. Sometimes she asked me a question about business math, which I could still answer faster than most calculators. Sometimes she didn't talk at all. She just needed somewhere to sit that didn't cost anything and didn't judge. One Sunday, she fell asleep at the table, head on her arm, pen still in her hand, a highlighter uncapped beside an open textbook. She had been up since 5 for a breakfast shift and had a paper due by midnight. I draped a blanket over her shoulders and let her sleep. She was 22 years old, working harder than anyone I knew, and the person who should have been carrying part of the weight was playing golf in Florida. That told me everything words never could. A week later, Damon stopped by to borrow a ladder. Not to visit, not to check on me, to borrow a tool. He came through the side door, which he always used because the front door stuck and he never had the patience to push it properly. He was on the phone when he walked in, didn't wave, didn't mouth hello, just held up one finger in the universal gesture of I'll be with you when I'm finished being important. I pointed toward the garage. He disappeared. I heard the aluminum scrape of the extension ladder being pulled from the wall brackets. A clatter. A muffled curse. Then the sound of him loading it into the back of the SUV. He came back inside for his keys, still on the phone. He grabbed them from my kitchen counter where he had set them beside a white envelope I hadn't noticed him put down. "Thanks, Pop," he said. "Half to me, half to the air." Then he was out the door. The SUV pulled away. The driveway went quiet. I turned to clear the counter. And that's when I saw what he had left behind. A bank envelope. White, standard issue, the kind every financial institution uses, with the logo in the upper left corner and the address window showing the account holder's name. Damon Brennick. The flap was open. Not sealed and torn, just open, like he had pulled the statement out, looked at it, and stuffed it back inside without pressing the adhesive down. The top edge of the paper was visible, just the first 2 lines. The account number partially redacted. The statement period, and the beginning of the balance summary, peeking above the fold like a secret that didn't know it was showing. I picked up the envelope to set it aside, to put it in a drawer, to leave it alone, the way a man should leave another man's finances alone. But the paper shifted inside, slid halfway out, and a number caught the corner of my eye, the way a flash of light catches you when you turn your head toward a window. 6 digits. I stopped. I didn't want to look. I want to be clear about that. I didn't go searching. I wasn't snooping. I was holding an envelope my son left on my counter, and the number was right there, exposed, staring up at me, like a word printed in bold in the middle of a page you were trying not to read. I pulled the statement out, not quickly, not the way someone pulls a letter they're excited to open, slowly, the way you pull a thread when you know the whole thing might unravel. The paper was heavy, quality stock, the kind banks use for customers who keep a certain balance, not the thin recycled stuff they send to people like me with a checking account and a modest savings that I built one deposit at a time over 40 years. I set it flat on the counter, smoothed the crease with my palm. The numbers were arranged in neat rows: deposits, withdrawals, transfers. A month of financial activity laid out with the precision of a life that was carefully managed. I didn't mean to pry. I have said that already, and I will say it once more, because it matters to me. I have never been the kind of man who opens other people's mail or reads over shoulders or checks receipts left on restaurant tables. But numbers have a way of catching my eye. 40 years of balancing books at the hardware store trained my brain to read columns the way a musician reads notes. Automatically. Instinctively. And what I read made the kitchen go very still. Savings account balance, $487,000. I read it twice, then I moved my finger down the page to the second section. A separate investment account linked to the same institution. Balance, $212,000. Combined, nearly $700,000 in liquid assets. Not property, not retirement funds locked behind penalties and age requirements. Liquid, accessible, the kind of money that sits in accounts waiting to be used. I set the paper down. My hands were steady, but my chest wasn't. Something tight had formed behind my sternum, in the space between my lungs where breath is supposed to move freely. It wasn't moving freely now. I thought about Claire, her shaking hands, the tea on my carpet, the tuition bill folded along its crease like a wound that had been opened and closed so many times the edges were soft. I thought about Damon at my counter, the polo shirt, the watch, the SUV in the driveway. The word "can't" delivered with the confidence of a man who believed no one would check his math. I looked at the number again, $487,000, and his daughter was working double shifts to buy textbooks. He wasn't broke, he wasn't stretched, he wasn't making hard choices between his retirement and his child's education. He was comfortable, deeply, carefully, deliberately comfortable. And he had looked his own daughter in the eye and told her he couldn't help. He had sat in my kitchen and talked about character building and financial responsibility while wearing a watch that cost more than her monthly rent. He didn't say, "I won't help you." That would have been honest, cruel but honest. At least she could have grieved the truth and moved on. He said, "I can't." And "can't" is a lie wrapped in helplessness. It shifts the blame from the person holding the money to the universe itself. It says, "My hands are tied," when the hands are free and the wallet is full. And the only thing that's actually tied is a man's willingness to share what he has with the person who needs it most. I folded the statement, slid it back into the envelope, placed it in the drawer beside the phone book. He was selective. That was worse than broke. Broke is a circumstance. Selective is a choice. And choices have consequences. Even when the person making them doesn't know the ledger has changed. I didn't call Damon that night. I sat in my armchair with the television off and the lamp on low and let the house do what it always did when I needed to think. It held still for me. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, a pipe in the wall behind the kitchen tapped gently the way it had for 30 years whenever the temperature dropped outside. I thought about Claire's face, the way her chin dropped when she talked about the loans, the way her eyes went flat, like the light behind them had been dimmed by something heavier than exhaustion. I thought about the number on the statement, 487,000. Sitting in an account while his daughter worked breakfast shifts and studied past midnight and drove a car held together with tape. I thought about calling him, confronting him right then, telling him what I found, and watching his face rearrange itself into whatever expression he had prepared for the day someone noticed. But anger without strategy is just noise. And noise fades. Noise gets talked over, explained away, absorbed by apologies that sound like action, but change nothing. I needed something that lasted longer than a conversation. I picked up the phone and dialed Lydia Cross. Lydia's office was in a narrow brick building on Talmadge Street, between a tailor shop and an accountant's office that had been there since before I was born. The stairs creaked. The banister was smooth from decades of hands gripping it on the way up. Her door was the second on the right, frosted glass with gold lettering that read Lydia Cross Esquire. The letters were slightly worn at the edges, like the words themselves had been working as long as she had. She looked up when I knocked. Small woman. Sharp eyes behind frameless glasses, a pen behind her ear and another in her hand, as if one were a backup for a weapon she might need at any moment. Walter, she said. No surprise. No small talk. She had known me for 20 years. She handled my wife Margaret's estate. She drafted my original will. She was the kind of attorney who remembered your children's names and your blood type and exactly how you took your coffee. I'd like to update my estate plan, I said. She set both pens down, pulled a legal pad from the second drawer, and looked at me the way she always did when I came in with that particular tone. Sit down, she said, and tell me what changed. I told her everything. Claire's visit, the tea on the carpet, the tuition bill, the way she folded inward like paper being creased along a line that had already been pressed too many times. I told her about Damon, the golf trips, the kitchen renovation, the word can't spoken from the comfort of a life that had never once been forced to choose between groceries and gas. And then I told her about the bank statement. Lydia didn't interrupt. She wrote in a hand so steady it looked like type. When I finished, she set the pen down and pressed her fingertips together in a small arch above the legal pad. Your current will splits everything evenly, she said. 50% to Damon. 50% to Claire. I know. Is that still what you want? I looked at the window behind her. The blinds were halfway open. Late afternoon light came through in horizontal lines that lay across the floor like a ladder. I thought equal was the same as fair, I said. It's not. She nodded. One slow nod. The nod of a woman who had heard that exact sentence from other parents in that exact chair. No, she said. It rarely is. We worked for an hour. Lydia asked questions I hadn't thought of. She drew diagrams on her legal pad. She used the word structure the way architects use it, not as an abstraction, as a load-bearing decision. My estate wasn't enormous. The house, a savings account I had built over 40 years at the same bank, a small investment fund my wife Margaret set up before she passed, a life insurance policy. Together it came to just over $600,000. Not a fortune. But to Claire, drowning in tuition debt and working shifts that started before sunrise, it was the difference between a decade of payments and freedom. I had always planned to leave it equally, half to Damon, half to Claire. That was the simple version, the version that assumed both of them needed it. The version that didn't account for a man with nearly $700,000 in liquid assets telling his daughter he couldn't afford to help. "I want Claire's loans paid off immediately upon my passing," I said. "Principal, interest, all of it, before anything else in the estate is distributed." Lydia wrote it down without hesitation. "That becomes a priority disbursement," she said. "It comes off the top." "Good," I said. "Put it in writing." The second change was harder to say out loud, not because it was complicated, because it involved my son, and there is a particular kind of grief that comes from restructuring your love for your child into legal language. "Damon's share," I said. "I want conditions." Lydia's pen paused, not from surprise, from attention. She was listening the way she listened to everything. "Completely." "What kind of conditions?" "I want a matching clause. For every year that Damon contributes a defined amount to Claire's education or professional development fund, he receives a proportional release of his inheritance. If he contributes, he receives. If he doesn't, the unreleased portion redirects to Claire." Lydia wrote for a long time. Her pen scratched across the paper with the sound of something being built one line at a time. "You're not punishing him," she said, looking up. "Not a question, an observation." "No," I said. "I'm giving him an opportunity to be the father he should have been." She nodded, made one final note, drew a bracket around a section of the page. "There's one more thing to consider," she said. "A threshold clause. If Damon holds liquid assets above a defined amount while Claire's loans remain outstanding, his share reduces automatically." I looked at her. "Mathematically?" I asked. "Mathematically," she confirmed, cleanly. The threshold was set at $300,000. If Damon held liquid assets above that number, while Claire still carried educational debt, his inheritance would reduce by a fixed percentage for every year the condition remained unmet. It wasn't vindictive. It was arithmetic. The same kind I used for 40 years at the hardware store. If the numbers don't balance, something is wrong. Lydia drafted the provision in language so precise it felt less like a document and more like a machine. Every gear turned. Every clause connected to the next. There were no gaps, no loopholes, nothing a clever attorney could dismantle without dismantling the entire structure. She read the final version aloud. Her voice was flat and even, the way voices sound when the words are doing all the work and the person reading them knows better than to add inflection. When she finished, she looked at me. "Are you certain, Walter?" I thought about Claire asleep at my dining table, pen in her hand. Highlighter uncapped, blanket I had draped over her still warm from the dryer. I thought about the number on the statement, the golf trips, the imported backsplash, the word can't, spoken without flinching. "I'm certain," I said. I signed the documents at 3:47 on a Tuesday afternoon. The pen didn't shake. I invited Damon over for dinner the following Thursday. Not because I was ready, because waiting would have made the conversation harder. And I had learned a long time ago that hard conversations don't soften with age, they calcify. I made meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans from a can because the garden was between seasons. It was the meal I always made when something important needed to be said. Margaret used to call it my serious supper. She knew the menu meant the evening wasn't casual. Damon didn't know that. He came in through the side door, took off his jacket, draped it over the chair like he was settling in for a routine visit. He sat at the table, helped himself before I finished setting down the serving dish. A small thing, but small things accumulate the way water collects in a basement. Slowly, invisibly, until the damage is done. We ate in near silence. He talked about a project at work, a trip he was planning, a neighbor dispute about a property line. I listened. I chewed slowly. I waited for the right moment, the way you wait for a gap in traffic before pulling onto a busy road. I set my fork down. "We need to talk about Claire," I said. He sighed. The kind of exhale that arrives before the conversation even starts, meant to signal that the topic is exhausting and the person raising it is being unreasonable. "Dad, we've been over this. She needs to learn to—" "I saw your bank statement." 4 words, delivered the way I used to deliver bad news to suppliers. Calmly. Without decoration, without leaving room for the listener to pretend they didn't hear. His fork stopped moving. His hand stayed in the air, halfway between the plate and his mouth, frozen in a position that looked like a man who had just been told the floor beneath him was no longer solid. "What?" he said. "You left it on my counter last Tuesday. When you came for the ladder." The envelope was open. His eyes moved to the counter, then back to me. His jaw shifted the way it did when he was calculating which version of himself to present. "That's private," he said. "So is your daughter crying in my living room because she can't afford school." The sentence landed between us like something dropped from a height, heavy, final, the kind of sentence that doesn't echo because the room has gone too still to carry sound. His face changed, not to anger first, to embarrassment. He tried to recover. I watched him do it in real time. The jaw set, the shoulders pulled back, the chin lifted by a degree. The subtle machinery of a man assembling his defense. "It's retirement money, Dad. It's not the same. I have a plan. Long-term security. You can't just... You let your daughter drown while you floated," I said. He stopped. His mouth stayed open. The words he had prepared sat behind his teeth, suddenly too heavy to push forward. "She works 30 hours a week," I continued. "She studies past midnight. She drives a car with a broken taillight. She fell asleep at my dining table because she was too exhausted to keep her eyes open. And you told her you couldn't help." I said it was about... "You said can't, not won't. You said can't to a girl who trusts you, and you had nearly $700,000 in the bank while she was choosing between groceries and gas." His hands moved to the edge of the table, gripping. Not from anger. From the particular unsteadiness of a man whose story has just been removed from beneath him. "Retirement security," he whispered. "So is family," I said. And I reached into the drawer beside me and slid the trust summary across the table. The paper sat between us. White, clean. 3 pages stapled at the corner. Lydia's letterhead at the top. My name and signature at the bottom. Damon looked at it the way people look at an envelope they already suspect contains something they don't want to read. He didn't reach for it immediately. His eyes moved from the document to me and back again, scanning for a signal. A softening. Some indication that this was a warning and not a verdict. I gave him nothing. I just sat there with my hands folded on the table and my meatloaf going cold on the plate. He picked it up, read the first page, turned to the second. His eyes moved faster, the way eyes move when the brain behind them has found the section that matters and is racing to understand the damage. He reached the matching clause, the threshold provision, the automatic reduction. His face didn't drain of color. It tightened. Every muscle pulled inward, like a fist closing slowly. "You're punishing me," he said. "No," I said. "I'm giving you what I should have given you 20 years ago, a reason to do the right thing." He stared at the page. The clock on the wall ticked, and neither of us moved. He read the clause twice, slowly the second time. His index finger traced the lines the way people trace sentences they want to argue with but can't find the flaw in. If Claire's outstanding educational loans remained unpaid, while Damon held liquid assets above $300,000, his share of my estate would reduce by 15% per year. Automatically. Without appeal. The redirected funds would move to Claire's trust. If he contributed annually to a defined education or development fund for Claire, his full inheritance would unlock in proportional increments. Dollar for dollar. Year by year. It wasn't punishment, it was a mirror. The kind you can't tilt away from because the numbers hold you in place. He set the document down, pressed his palms flat against the table. His watch caught the kitchen light and threw a small rectangle of brightness onto the ceiling. "You really did this," he said. "I really did." "And Claire knows?" "Claire doesn't know any of it. She doesn't need to. This is between you and me, and the choices you make from here." He looked at me, not with anger, not with understanding either, with something in between, something unsettled, like a man standing in a doorway, not yet sure which direction to step. He left at 8:30. Didn't finish his meatloaf, didn't take the leftovers I offered. He put on his jacket, walked to the driveway, and sat in his SUV for 4 full minutes before starting the engine. I watched from the kitchen window. The dashboard lit his face in blue light. He was looking at his phone. Then he set it down, stared at the windshield. Then he drove away. Claire came by that Sunday. Same routine. Textbooks on the table. A cup of tea I made without her asking. The highlighter uncapped before she even sat down. She didn't mention her father. I didn't either. 2 months later, her tuition balance disappeared. The full amount, principal and accumulated interest, paid in a single transfer from an account she didn't recognize. She called me in tears. Good tears. The kind that come with confusion and relief, and the strange vertigo of a weight being lifted so suddenly you almost fall forward. "Do you know anything about this?" she asked. "No," I lied. The only lie I've ever told her. She didn't need to know the mechanics. She just needed the math to finally work in her favor. And somewhere across town, Damon looked a little less comfortable. Not poorer, not punished, just accountable. For the first time in his life, just accountable.